That's my granddad's signature." Lila's voice cut through the polished silence of the Caldwell Foundation's grand hall. Every head turned. The billionaire at the front, Richard Caldwell, froze mid-sentence. His son, Ethan, stared at the young woman standing among guests in second-hand heels and a borrowed dress, holding a crumpled document close to her chest. The laughter, the champagne, the speeches, everything stopped. Her words hung heavy. Trembling with something more dangerous than accusation, truth, for a moment, no one moved. Then Richard's face turned pale, his jaw tightening, because he had seen that signature before, and he knew exactly what it meant. Lila Moreno grew up in the quiet backrooms of other people's houses. Her mother, Maria, worked as a live-in maid for the Caldwell family on Chicago's wealthy North Shore. While other children played in wide yards, Lila learned to tiptoe across marble floors and keep her voice low when men in suits passed by. Yet, her mother never let bitterness take root. "I work clean. Speak true," Maria would say. "We don't bow. We don't break." That became Lila's quiet creed, dignity over pity, truth over comfort. She carried those words into adulthood, juggling classes at the University of Chicago by day and waiting tables at night. Her scholarship was fragile, her pride unshakable. She didn't complain, didn't ask for favors. She just kept building a future her mother had once dreamed of, a life earned, not gifted. When Maria passed away, Lila found a small wooden trunk under her mother's bed. Inside were family photos, faded letters, and one document that felt strangely official, a property deed stamped with a gold seal and signed by a man named Samuel Hayes. It meant little at first, just another fragment of a life she'd barely known. But one line stood out: Caldwell Estate, 1949. Weeks later, an email arrived from the Caldwell Foundation, an invitation to a charity gala honoring Maria for her years of loyal service. The irony stung, but gratitude won. She decided to go, to stand tall in the place her mother had always. Bowed, Lila pressed her mother's old pearl, pinned to her dress that night, her only keepsake, unaware that the folded paper inside her purse would soon shatter the illusion of who truly owned the world she was walking into. The night of the Caldwell Foundation Gala arrived draped in gold and pretense. Lila stood outside the glittering Hyde Park Grand Hotel, gripping her thrifted clutch, her pulse quick and uneven. The invitation in her hand looked surreal, embossed in silver, her name written in perfect cursive. It wasn't just a card. It was access to a world she'd only ever dusted the edges of. Inside, chandeliers burned like constellations. Lila moved carefully among Chicago's elite, politicians, art donors, tech investors. She was there to represent the University Art Preservation Program, chosen for her presentation on restoring lost works. For once, her words, her education, her discipline, they were her armor. When Ethan Caldwell introduced himself, she didn't know who he was at first. His handshake was polite, his questions sincere. He wasn't like the others, no false pity, no smirk at her thrift store gown. Just quiet interest. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe this night might hold something good, a bridge, not a wall. Her presentation earned a light wave of applause, polite but respectful. Then someone near the table mentioned her last name, Moreno. The air shifted. A few guests exchanged looks, half smiles. One whispered, wasn't her mother the maid? Still, Lila smiled and kept her posture straight. The murmurs passed. The spotlight moved. She exhaled, unaware that the moment she thought she had escaped her mother's shadow, she had only stepped directly into its light. As the next event began, a charity auction of historic artifacts from the Caldwell estate, the host announced, each piece tells the story of a legacy, and among those shining relics was a framed document Lila never expected to see again. The auction began with polite laughter and paddles raised between sips of champagne. Silverware glimmered under the chandeliers, and the crowd leaned in as the host announced the next lot. Lot 12, he said proudly, the original deed to Caldwell Estate, signed by the founding partner himself, Samuel Hayes. In 1949, applause filled the hall. The framed parchment gleamed under the spotlight, the ink dark and confident, a signature bold enough to have built empires. Lila's pulse stuttered. She recognized that name, that handwriting. It was identical to the document her mother had hidden for decades. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she stepped closer, her fingers trembling against the edge of her clutch. "That's my granddad's signature," she said quietly, but her voice carried. Slicing through the laughter, the host froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward her. Richard Caldwell's brow furrowed. "Excuse me?" Lila swallowed hard. "The signature. Samuel Hayes. He was my mother's father. My grandfather." A hush fell so deep it hummed. Then came the smirks. A woman near the front whispered to her friend. A man in a tux let out a short, amused breath. Richard stepped forward, his tone deceptively calm. "Young lady, are you suggesting that my family's estate belongs to you?" "I'm saying," Lila replied, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, "that my grandfather's name was Samuel Hayes. I have proof." She reached into her purse, pulling out the folded deed from her mother's trunk. The audience leaned closer. Richard didn't take the paper. Instead, he chuckled, the practiced sound of a man who'd spent a lifetime dismissing inconvenient truths. "I think you've been misinformed," he said, his smile tightening. "Your mother worked for my family, didn't she? Sometimes stories get confused." The crowd laughed lightly, sensing permission. Lila's face flushed, but she didn't move. "I'm not confused." "Then you're delusional," Richard snapped, his voice rising. "Security!" Gasps rippled. Ethan stood frozen near the stage. His eyes locked on Lila, on the courage burning in her humiliation. Two guards approached, and for a heartbeat, Lila considered speaking again. But the room was already moving on, conversation resuming, laughter covering shame. As she was led toward the exit, Ethan caught the faint glint of the paper in her trembling hands, and the name that had shaken the room to silence. Ethan Caldwell had grown up among marble and silence, the kind of silence that hides things rather than heals them. He'd been taught that appearances mattered more than questions, and that questions once asked could never be taken back. But that night, as the echo of Lila's voice lingered in the air, something cracked inside him. He watched her disappear through the gilded doors, the soft blue of her dress vanishing against the dark hallway. His father's laughter filled the gap she left behind, that confident, practiced sound that kept the powerful comfortable. But all Ethan could see was the look on her face, a mix of humiliation and certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't come from ambition, but from truth. He slipped away from the gala, ignoring the murmurs, and found her outside under the hotel's portico. Snow had begun to fall, slow and heavy, gathering on her shoulders. Lila clutched the document like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You shouldn't be out here," Ethan said quietly. She didn't look up. "I shouldn't have been in there either. Isn't that what they think?" He hesitated, then sat on the cold stone step beside her. "My father had no right to speak to you that way." Her laugh was brittle. "Your father didn't just speak. He erased." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant traffic filled the silence, mingled with the whisper of falling snow. Finally, Ethan nodded toward the folded paper. "May I see it?" Lila hesitated, then handed it over, not out of trust, but exhaustion. Ethan unfolded it carefully. His gaze moved across the seal, the signatures, the fine print. His stomach tightened. The ink, the format, even the paper stock, they were identical to the document he'd seen his father display moments ago. This wasn't coincidence. It was duplication. When he looked up, Lila's eyes met his. "It's real, isn't it?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Not yet, but inside he knew. His family's fortune, the legacy his father guarded like a crown, had roots tangled in theft. And now, for the first time, Ethan Caldwell couldn't tell which side of the truth he belonged to. The next morning, Chicago headlines glimmered with scandal. Maid's daughter disrupts Caldwell gala, claiming ownership of estate. Lila's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Online voices mocked her, questioned her, twisted her courage into spectacle. She ignored them all until she saw the photo. Ethan Caldwell, standing behind his father, looking away as she was led out. It stung worse than the laughter. By afternoon, a black sedan stopped outside the university library where Lila worked part-time. Ethan stepped out, no bodyguards, no arrogance. Just a man carrying an envelope. I came to apologize, he said simply. She didn't make it easy. You're a day late, and a life apart, he nodded, taking the words like a blow he'd expected. Maybe, but I checked the archives at my father's office this morning. He opened the envelope, sliding out photos of the Caldwell deed beside photocopies of hers. They're the same, down to the notary stamp. Only one difference. Your document was signed first. Lila's breath caught. So what does that mean? It means someone altered the record, Ethan replied, his voice tight. And I think my father knew. For a moment the library's hum faded. Between them lay two truths, one buried by power, the other carried in grief. Why tell me this? She asked finally. Because it's yours, he said, the truth, whether my family likes it or not. Her eyes met his, not with forgiveness, but with recognition. The son of privilege and the maid's daughter, bound now by the same quiet rebellion. When he left, he didn't ask for her trust. He'd earned something rarer that night, her willingness to keep listening, and that changed everything. The Caldwell penthouse overlooked the frozen city, all glass, gold, and silence. Richard Caldwell stood by the window, a glass of scotch melting in his hand, when Ethan walked in, the copied documents tucked under his arm. I went through the archives, Ethan said. There's a duplicate deed. The one on display isn't original. Richard didn't turn. You shouldn't have touched those files. I had to, Ethan replied. You humiliated her in front of hundreds of people for telling the truth. Richard's voice hardened. You don't understand what's at stake. This family name built half of this city. That estate is our foundation, our credibility. Ethan took a step forward. Our credibility was stolen, Dad. You've built everything on a lie. Richard turned sharply, eyes cold. We built what we deserved. Her grandfather was compensated. That's the end of it. Ethan's laugh was bitter. Compensated. You forged a transfer. You rewrote history. The older man's jaw tightened. Don't pretend you understand power, Ethan. People like us, we keep the order. Without that, everything collapses. Ethan's voice rose, quiet but fierce. No! You keep control. There's a difference. For a moment, they stood across, from each other, generations of privilege and guilt suspended in the still air. Richard's expression softened only slightly. If you expose this, you'll ruin the Caldwell name. You'll ruin yourself. Ethan set the papers on the table, the faint rustle louder than the city below. Then maybe the name deserves it. Richard looked at his son, truly looked, and for the first time saw a man who no longer carried his reflection. Ethan walked out without another word. Behind him, the glass walls of the Caldwell Empire seemed to tremble. By the next week, the whispers had grown teeth. News outlets spun the story into a public tug-of-war. Billionaire's son betrays his own father. Maid's daughter claims heritage, forgery, or family feud. The city that once ignored Lila now dissected her every word, her face appearing on morning talk shows she never agreed to join. At the university cafe, eyes followed her like spotlights. Conversations hushed when she entered. She tried to hide in her work, sorting old records for the art department, but her hands trembled too much to type. When Ethan arrived, she didn't look up. You shouldn't be here, she said flatly. Probably not, he admitted, but neither should what your grandfather built be buried. Lila's laugh was dry. You think truth makes it easier? You've seen what they've done online. They call me a liar, a gold digger, a fraud, and you'll be fine. You'll still be a Caldwell. Ethan leaned forward. You think I wanted this storm? I lost my father's trust. Every investor he knows is cutting me off, but I'd rather lose that than lose myself." Her gaze softened, but her voice stayed guarded. "You don't understand, Ethan. You can walk away from this. I have to live it." He nodded slowly. "Then let me live it with you." The words hung in the air, not romantic, but real. A vow of responsibility. Lila looked at him then, truly saw him. The quiet sincerity, the exhaustion, the guilt. She realized he wasn't trying to save her, he was trying to stand beside her. "I didn't ask for a partner," she said finally. "I know," he replied, "but the truth doesn't care who asks for it." For the first time since the gala, Lila felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness, but the first trace of relief. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unbothered by the noise of the world. Two people sat in its quiet, one carrying the weight of power, the other the weight of proof, both learning that truth, once spoken, binds more tightly than blood. A week later, the university's Art Preservation Department announced an investigation into the Caldwell archives after receiving an anonymous tip, Ethan's doing. The board requested Lila's assistance as an independent researcher, citing her background in archival preservation. She accepted, though reluctantly, knowing Ethan would be part of the process. Their first meeting in the dusty, dim-lit records room was taut with silence. Stacks of boxes surrounded them, brittle papers, estate ledgers, yellowed photographs. Each folder was a ghost of the past neither of them could ignore. At first they worked wordlessly. Lila catalogued, Ethan cross-checked. The air buzzed, with unspoken tension, but also an odd rhythm, cautious cooperation. "Your grandfather's name appears in every early ledger," Ethan said, breaking the quiet. "He wasn't just an employee, he was a partner." Lila paused, her hand resting on the edge of a worn blueprint. "A partner without a legacy," she murmured. Ethan looked at her. Not anymore. Hours turned into days. They traced the story through ink and memory. Samuel Hayes had co-founded the Caldwell Estate Restoration Project, the very foundation Richard Caldwell claimed as his own. His shares had been quietly signed away, under pressure, during a hospital stay. Through the search, Ethan learned about Maria, how she'd worked 3 jobs, how Lila had studied by candlelight when their power was cut. Lila, in turn, saw pieces of him she hadn't expected. The quiet resentment of a man raised in the shadow of perfection. They didn't need to say it aloud, but both understood. They were no longer adversaries. They were co-guardians of a truth older than their anger. When the final document surfaced, a handwritten letter sealed in dust, it bore a familiar line. "We don't bow. We don't break." The same words Maria had taught her, the same words Ethan now read as a promise. It was near midnight when they found it, a folded parchment tucked inside an unlabeled folder, brittle from age and neglect. The header read, "Supplementary Contract, 1949. Lila held her breath as she read the fine print under the flickering desk lamp. Pending transfer of ownership to Richard Caldwell Sr. to be executed upon the recovery of Samuel Hayes. The word recovery had been crossed out, replaced with decease in different ink. Ethan's throat tightened. "They changed it after your grandfather was hospitalized." Lila's voice trembled, not from surprise, but confirmation. "He never sold it. They waited until he died." The silence that followed was heavy, intimate, the kind that only truth can create. Ethan traced the ink with his fingertip, his jaw clenching. "My family didn't inherit the estate. They stole it." Lila leaned back, her eyes distant. "Your name built the mansion. His blood built the foundation." For a moment, their worlds, privilege and struggle, stood level. 2 lives tethered by the same injustice, one born from it, one buried beneath it. Ethan exhaled shakily. "You were right. It was his signature, and it still is." Lila met his gaze. Then it's time people knew whose story they've been living in. The words landed like a vow. Outside the archives, the city lights blurred in the window, their reflections overlapping, her small frame beside his tall shadow, distinct yet bound by shared clarity. Ethan closed the file and said quietly, "You know what happens when we do this." Lila's reply was steady. "Yes, it's the same thing that happens when we don't." And in that single choice between silence and consequence, they found the courage that neither inheritance nor hardship could give, the will to confront the lie together. The Caldwell Foundation auditorium was packed. Reporters, board members, donors, and the curious public all buzzing with restless anticipation. The press release had been brief. Joint statement. Caldwell Estate historical clarification. No one knew what that meant, but the presence of Ethan Caldwell beside Lila Moreno on stage made the stakes clear. Lila's fingers trembled as she unfolded the original deed. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of generations watching through her. Ethan stepped to the microphone first. For 70 years, this foundation has honored a legacy that was never truly ours, he began, his voice steady but low. The truth is simple. My family's estate was co-founded by Samuel Hayes, a man history erased, and whose bloodline stands beside me today. The murmurs rose to gasps. Richard Caldwell, seated in the front row, paled but said nothing. His empire's glass walls were finally cracking. Lila stepped forward, holding up the old deed. "This isn't about ownership," she said softly. "It's about acknowledgement. My grandfather's name wasn't lost. It was hidden. My mother lived and died in service to the home her father helped build. I only ask that history reflect the truth." The room fell silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Richard stood, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The crowd's eyes weren't on him anymore. They were on her. The foundation chair cleared his throat, emotion thick in his voice. "Effective immediately, the Caldwell Estate will be renamed the Hayes Moreno Heritage Trust, preserving both families' legacies equally." Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then strong and rising. Lila didn't smile, she only exhaled, long, steady, and free. The power that once humiliated her now stood silent, listening. Spring arrived quietly in Chicago, melting the last of winter's frost from the gardens once known as the Caldwell Estate. Now a new bronze plaque stood at the entrance, Hayes Moreno Heritage Park. Lila walked the gravel path her mother used to sweep every morning. The mansion loomed ahead, its marble now open to school tours and history programs, no longer a monument to one name, but two. She paused before the plaque and traced the engraved words, Samuel Hayes, 1915-1950, Maria Moreno, 1975-2023, for those who built with their hands and believed with their hearts. In the corner of the plaque, etched faintly but purposefully, was the same signature she had once cried over in disbelief, her grandfather's mark. Preserved forever, Ethan joined her quietly, holding 2 white lilies. He placed one beside hers, then stepped back. No speeches, no apologies. "Just respect," Lila whispered the words her mother once told her. "We don't bow. We don't break." The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. The signature that once divided their worlds now united them, not in power, but in truth. And with that, the story that began in shame ended in honor. Sometimes, the most powerful inheritance isn't money or land, it's truth. Lila didn't win a fortune. She reclaimed a name. And Ethan, the man who grew up inside walls built on silence, learned that doing what's right often costs more than staying comfortable, but it's worth every price. In the end, one signature changed everything, not because of what it proved, but because of who dared to speak it aloud. If this story made you feel something, share it. Maybe someone out there needs to remember that dignity is not granted, it's lived. And no matter how small your voice feels, when it carries truth, Even the powerful have to listen because names fade, fortunes shift and empires crumble, but integrity, once spoken into the light, never disappears.